Laying. I'm chairman of the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation, and it's my pleasure and my honor to welcome you to the 5th anniversary of the dedication of the Victims of Communism Memorial. If I may, I would like to ask you to rise and stand for a moment of silence to the victims of communism. Thank you. Please take your seats. Exactly 5 years ago, on this busy triangle of land, in view of the U.S. Capitol behind me, we dedicated the Victims of Communism Memorial. It is the only memorial in the world to the more than 100 million victims of communism. Accepting the memorial on behalf of the American people, President George W. Bush said, "It is fitting that we gather to remember those who perished at communism's hands and dedicate this memorial that will enshrine their suffering and sacrifice in the conscience of the world." Our keynote was delivered by the always eloquent Representative Tom Lantos, who passed away less than a year later. But we will hear later from his wife and longtime partner, Annette Lantos, who is no less eloquent when talking about the importance of remembrance and the need for vigilance in the preservation of liberty. Over the last 5 years, dozens of national leaders from around the world have visited the memorial to lay a wreath and pay their respects to the victims of communism in their country. In addition, many American ethnic communities, Chinese, Vietnamese, Cuban, and others, have come here to light a candle and say a prayer for those who died because they bravely resisted tyrants like Stalin, Mao, Castro, Pol Pot, and Kim Il-sung. The memorial has in fact become what we hoped it would, a gathering place for those who love liberty and an international symbol of man's innate desire for freedom. And for those who say that bipartisanship is dead in this city, I call their attention to our featured speakers this morning, Annette Lantos and Donald Rumsfeld. You can't get more bipartisan than that. Our foundation believes and practices that politics should stop at the water's edge. I'm pleased to report that our online Global Museum on Communism, launched in 2009, continues to attract visitors from around the world. It's the only museum on the internet that tells the story of communism from Marx to Mao and beyond. It has had nearly 125,000 unique visitors from 181 countries, including China, Vietnam, and Cuba. We are now completing our latest educational project, a curriculum on communism for high school students. It's a dynamic, interactive 10-lesson plan for teachers to help them instruct their pupils about the history, philosophy, and legacy of communism. The plan makes full use of the online Global Museum on Communism and will begin marketing the curriculum to public, private, and home schools this fall. But that's not all. From the beginning, our foundation has discussed the possibility of a bricks and mortar museum in Washington. Now, many have applauded the idea, but until recently, no one stepped forward with the necessary, tangible support. I am pleased to announce this morning that Prime Minister Viktor Orban of the Republic of Hungary has made a major commitment, enabling us to start planning seriously for an international museum on communism in Washington, D.C. We are deeply, deeply grateful to Prime Minister Orban and the government of Hungary for their generosity and their faith in us. And we are confident that our other friends and supporters here in America and around the world will now step forward and join the international campaign to build an international museum on communism on or near the mall here in Washington. Ladies and gentlemen, our Jewish brothers and sisters understand what's at stake. They understand that history must not be forgotten, lest it be repeated. They keep reminding the world of the Holocaust, crying, "Never again." Even so, we cannot, we must not, we will not forget the victims of communism or their sacrifice. And let us all pledge that never again will we allow so evil a tyranny as communism to terrorize and subjugate the world. Thank you.
Bravo!
And now, ladies and gentlemen, to begin our program of speakers, I would like to recognize and call upon the former Congressman Joe Diaguardi for some remarks about an organization that he heads up, and it means a great deal to what we're trying to do here with the victims of communism.
Thank you, Dr. Edwards and Ed Priola and all of the people who had the foresight to not forget the victims of communism in so many countries. I feel very blessed to be here because I was in Congress in the 80s when I discovered that my father's roots, although he was born in Italy, came out of Albania. Albanians found my family speaking the Albanian language as well as the Italian language, and I became their voice at a very difficult time, as you know, and as you know, Don, with Kosovo and whatnot. Congressman Lantos and President George W. Bush did something wonderful here. In a way, I feel blessed that Dana Rohrabacher, my good friend, who's been here for all 4 years, couldn't be here and asked me, in effect, to take his place. Annette Lantos, are you here? Annette, God bless you. I have to remind you, and I was hoping to see you before, but I got a little lost, so I couldn't prep you on that. But in 1989, the Berlin Wall came down. In 1990, Congressman Lantos, who had worked with me for 4 years on the issue of Albanian human rights, especially with the occupation of Kosovo with Slobodan Milosevic, we managed to go across the border, the first ones in 45 years, officially, across the border after we confronted Slobodan Milosevic about his brutal occupation in Kosovo. We went to Tirana, the first ones in 45 years. Little did I know that Congressman Lantos had already been at the CIA and they wanted our embassy back and we had to go there and visit it. I didn't know why until we came back. But Congressman Lantos, as eloquent as he was, I have to repeat his words. He confronted the successor to the most brutal communist dictator the world has known, at least to the Albanian people, Enver Hoxha. And he turned to Ramiz Alia and he said, the Berlin Wall is down. And yet you still have this wall of communism separating you from the Albanian people. Tear this wall down. And that was early June, June 1st, 1990. Within weeks, Albanians were running to the embassies for asylum. Within a month or two, a boat loaded with thousands of Albanians came from the port of Durrës, Albania, into Italy. That was the beginning. We started a movement on that. It was history. Now I'm going to ask you to join me, and I don't know where the Albanian ambassador is. He told me he would be here, but I believe he's here with his staff, and I'm going to appeal to Ambassador Galanci to start another movement. It's been 22 years, and the Albanian government has not apologized to the thousands of people in the worst internment camps other than the Nazis. There has been no Truth and Reconciliation Commission. There hasn't been an opening of the communist archives. There's a lack of trust. The Albanian word besa, which means trust, it's from the ancient code. That trust was broken by Enver Hoxha after the Albanians fought against Mussolini's fascists and then the Nazis. And then they were delivered into the hands of a psychopathic leader, Enver Hoxha, who tortured them, killed them, took away their communal spirit. He had families not trusting families, siblings not trusting siblings. And this went on for years. There needs to be some redress, and I'm hoping that 22 years later, the Albanian government will get the message that if they want to become part of Europe, and they're not there yet, Romania is part of Europe, Croatia is, Slovenia is, Serbia is on its way. Where's Albania? You need to build a bridge back to the people, build the trust that was there for centuries, Mr. Ambassador, Prime Minister Berisha, so that Albania can be fully a part of Europe. Today we have with us two of the people who spent over 10 years in the worst prison, Spac and Pelham Lumai, are you here? And Raymond Seiko. I know they're on their way down, but they were going to come and be here with us as well. So with that, I would say that this is a marvelous opportunity. Let me just close by waving this to you at the reception. I have enough copies of this book. You'll see the Albanian flag and the Israeli flag, because it's the Albanian people. I don't say it. Israel has said it. The only nation in Europe that saved every Jew in Albania, 400 families that were there from the burning of the Second Temple and the Spanish Inquisition, and 2,000 more who made it across the border from Yugoslavia, where they couldn't trust the Nazis, but they could trust the Albanians in Albania. And also, Shirley Cloys, my wife, is here. She wrote a seminal article on not only the protracted fall of communism in Albania, but denial of memory. We have copies of that if you're going to be at the reception. God bless you all for being here. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, one country that still suffers under a communist regime, the people, and not by their choice, is Vietnam. And I would now like to ask Antu Lu, if she would, to come forward. Antu is a member of the board of the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation, and she was one of the boat people who left Vietnam as a child. And she's come to America, made a wonderful career for herself. She's working with the Vietnamese community both here and around the world. And please, Antu, would you come forward and talk about this wonderful display that we have back over here under the tents.
Thank you, Dr. Edwards. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Dr. Edwards just introduced me as a boat people. I did escape Vietnam by boat, but I was one of a very lucky one, for I was picked up by the U.S. Navy out in the international ocean. But hundreds of thousands of other boat people were not as lucky. There are no real numbers, but per the UN report, at the end of the Vietnam War in 1975, there were an estimated 1.2 million people escaped communism from Vietnam by boat between 1975 and 1995. Of those 1.2 million, about 1/3 perished at sea. Of those arrived at various Southeast Asian countries, another 1/3 died in those inhabited islands in Southeast Asia of wounds inflicted during their journey. The Vietnamese communist regime persecuted them even in their graves. Markers to remember the boat people were destroyed at the pressure of Hanoi. The boat people fled their homeland in small, rickety boats that typically packed 200 people into a few square meters. Pirates in the Gulf of Siam found the refugees easy targets and the boats were frequently attacked, sometimes repeatedly. Both people were robbed, raped, abducted, and sometimes mutilated and killed. The UN High Commissioner for Refugee reported that 1981, in Thai waters alone, there had been 1,149 attacks on 352 boats, 571 people were killed, 243 abducted, and 599 raped by pirates. Omitted by the UN statistics are those boats that disappear without ever reaching shore. The late Friar Joe Devlin, a Jesuit priest who worked in the refugee camps, would later recount, each morning we would go down to the beaches and there were bodies, men, women, children, washed ashore during the night. Sometimes there was hundreds of them, like pieces of wood. Some of them were girls who had been raped and then thrown into the sea to drown by the pirates. It was tragic beyond words. We would pull them off the beaches and bury them and say prayers for them. This happened every morning. Sometimes I hate to get up in the morning as the bodies will always be there. Ladies and gentlemen, that was just a short, simple story of the boat people journey to freedom. They had risked it all, including their lives, for freedom. The exhibit here today, I invite you to visit. It's just as simple. We will have a full exhibit later on in the fall. We hope you will join us and help us keep their memories alive. Thank you very much.
From halfway around the world, I would now like to introduce Mr. Gan Lamo, a former political prisoner and member of the Tibetan Parliament in exile. Actually, we're going to ask, he has a message for us, a brief message, to talk about the plight of the Tibetans, which still continues to this day because of the regime in Beijing. We're going to ask, actually, someone to read his message to us right now, please.
Victims of Communism Memory Foundation, on behalf of those standing here with me, I thank you for hosting this important event. We gather here to remember communism's countless victims. However, we must not forget about those who have yet to know freedom. We, like Mr. Harry Wu, now firsthand the horrors of communism at the hands of our supposed liberators. We have each suffered torture in China's lagers. What we overcame, we voiced our support for His Holiness the Dalai Lama. We protested for his return to Tibet. We asked for freedom, yet our peaceful protest will meet with swift and violent crackdowns, now only seen in countries ruled by despots. Today, we humbly ask the world to stop turning a blind eye to the plight of people suffering under communism. This problem may seem big. However, we believe that if all countries that stand for freedom and human rights work together, achieving true freedom would only be a matter of time. Dr. Mother Luther King Jr. said is best. Injustice anywhere is truth to justice everywhere. Thank you.
I'd like to call on Reggie Littlejohn, President of Women's Rights Without Frontiers, to talk with us about the situation in the mainland of China dealing with women's rights. Reggie Littlejohn.
Thank you, Dr. Edwards. Guests, I am greatly humbled by being asked to speak at this somber anniversary commemorating 5 years of victims of communism. It is fitting that the memorial itself is a replica of the Goddess of Democracy, which was erected by the students on Tiananmen Square as a beacon of hope before they were so brutally slaughtered by their own government. Indeed, this is the hallmark of communistic governments, which is the peacetime mass killing of their own citizens. It is estimated that the former Soviet Union under Stalin committed 20 million such killings, and that the Chinese Communist Party under Mao committed 65 million of such killings. This would include people who were killed in the Cultural Revolution, the Great Leap Forward, also people who died in the Laogai system of forced labor camps, and the repression of Tibetans, Uyghurs, and the Falun Gong. And yet, even this 100 million number is dwarfed by another hidden number, a number that heretofore has not really been considered to be part of the victims of communism. It is a hidden category of victims, the victims of China's one-child policy. Women's Rights Without Frontiers has learned that a woman in Shanxi province, China, was forcibly aborted just last week. Feng Jianmei was 7 months pregnant when family planning officials came to her, demanded a fantastically high fine of 40,000 RMB, and when they couldn't pay, they dragged her into a vehicle, strapped her down to a table, and forcibly aborted her child at 7 months, then laid that child next to her in the bed. Feng Jianmei is not alone. The Chinese Communist Party estimates that it has prevented 400 million lives through the one-child policy. Every one of those 400 million snuffed out lives is a victim of communism. So instead of seeing 100 million people who died under communism, it should be 500 million if you include the deaths that are part of the one-child policy. Affecting 1.5 billion people, or 1 in every 5 women in the world, the coercive enforcement of China's one-child policy causes more violence against women and girls than any other official policy on earth and any other official policy in the history of the world. In the following ways. Number 1, forced abortion is violence against women. It happens up to the 9th month of pregnancy, and sometimes these procedures are so violent that the women themselves die along with their full-term babies. Number 2, forced sterilization. Number 3, infanticide is officially practiced in China. Number 4, because of the traditional preference for boys, girls are selectively aborted. And there are estimates that there are between 100 million and 200 million women missing in the world today because of gendercide. In the case of China, because of gendercide, there are now an estimated 37 million more men living in China today than women. And what this gender imbalance is doing is it is driving human trafficking and sexual slavery, not only in China, but from the surrounding countries as well. And finally, China has the highest female suicide rate of any country in the world. It is the only country in which more women than men kill themselves. In the Chinese countryside, 3 times the number of women as men kill themselves. According to the World Health Organization, 500 women a day end their lives in the nation of China. The one-child policy is causing a slow-motion demographic disaster. Not only is there a destabilizing gender imbalance, but also the population problem in China is not that China has too many people, but that China has too few young people to support its rapidly aging population. Why then does China continue to implement this policy? I believe that China's one-child policy is the glue that is keeping the regime in place. It is social control masquerading as population control. The Chinese Communist Party wields forced abortion as an instrument of terror. The Chinese population control police are domestic terrorists, and forced abortion is official government rape. They use terror, the terror of the one-child policy, to keep the population down. The infrastructure of population control coercion can be aimed in any direction to crush dissent. Use of a system of paid informants to identify illegally pregnant women tears at relationships of trust. And if you cannot trust anyone, you cannot organize for democracy. The true spirit of communism is most clearly seen in the faces of the population control police as they drag women away, beat them, strap them down to tables, and force them to abort babies that they want up to the 9th month of pregnancy. Whether China will turn and become a free democratic nation, or whether China will continue down the path of totalitarian destruction, is the greatest issue of the 21st century and has vast implications for our national security. Supporting democracy in China should be among the highest priorities of the leaders of the free world. Thank you.
I'd like now to call upon Congressman Andy Harris of Maryland. And there are many reasons why we're so pleased to have him here, and that is, among them, is the fact, I believe, that your parents were in the Gulag. And so Congressman Harris can speak truly and sincerely from his heart about what this project of ours, what our campaign is all about. Congressman Harris.
Thank you very much. It's truly an honor to be here with the foundation. As the introduction suggested, yes, my parents both escaped communism in Eastern Europe. My mother from the Ukraine, where of course millions of Ukrainians were starved in a forced famine. My father from Hungary, where after he had spent 2 years in the Gulag. And fortunately for the Harris family, we're not one of the 100 million people who died under communism, but there are 100 million people who died and continue to die under communism even till today. So I'm honored to be here with you today. I'm honored to be with Secretary Rumsfeld, of course, and thank him for the work he's done in protecting the world from communism and helping win the Cold War. But the job is not over. As we know, communism still exists in the world. It still kills millions of people. And as you have heard, free people around the world should join to defeat communism. Thank you very much.
And now for our keynote address, just as we had 5 years ago with Congressman Tom Lantos, we're now so honored that we're able to have his longtime partner and associate and colleague, Annette Lantos, to talk to us this morning.
Okay, this one. Okay. All right. I'm very honored to be here. My husband appears here every year.
and it was his last appearance just before he passed away, that he shared his experiences of what it meant to be a victim of communism and what it meant to fight that evil force in our world. Speaking to my friends associated with the victims of communism is always an opportunity for reflection, sorrow, and gratitude. To the victims of communism who are here today, how grateful we are to be together with you. Many still suffer under the yoke of communist regimes. It's a tribute to you and to this organization that you continue to raise your voices, decrying the ongoing injustice and oppression that are the fruits of communist totalitarian governments everywhere. Simultaneously, we honor the martyrs and innocent ordinary people who have been victims of communism in the past. It is vital that we, people who have experienced the violence and oppression of communism, continue to keep those sad memories alive for our children, grandchildren, and even our great-grandchildren. There is a temptation to simply forget. David Satter, an expert on Soviet Russia and its transition from communism, has written a book. I think even its brilliant title is very threatening. It's called "It Was a Long Ago and It Never Really Happened." Apparently, this is an aphorism in Russia. How easy it is to simply ignore the lessons of history and how distressingly easy it is to repeat them. The Soviets, by refusing to forget and to let our government and people forget the horrors of the all too recent past and the ongoing treachery which communism is inflicting on our brothers and sisters in Tibet, China, and North Korea, to name just a few of the sites of current communist abuses, are inflicting a tremendous injustice on people. But many years ago, when my late husband, Tom Lantos, in his professional incarnation, was teaching at San Francisco State University, a well-known American communist was invited to speak at the local junior college. There was a major uproar in our suburban community. People were outraged that the minds of our youth should be exposed to such pernicious ideas at school. But Tom came forward and insisted there was no reason to be upset. This communist can and should speak, but not unchallenged. Dr. Lantos, as he was then commonly known, said, "We can have a debate." Tom was an outspoken anti-communist, and with reason and truth in his arsenal, he roundly defeated the arguments of his communist rival and allowed the students to compare the visions and the reality of the two systems. I think we all wish we lived in much less selfish societies, where prosperity was available to everyone and where great disparities in poverty, hunger, and wealth were eliminated. But any noble ideals of this godless system of government are obscured completely by communism's commitment to deprive people of what is most valuable, the only thing that is inherently our own, our freedom of thought, of action, of faith, and of choice. Communist ideas and communism's reality do not intersect. Its practice is right with abuse, from forced labor and abortion to forced cultural assimilation. Its practice isn't about people coming together and choosing to improve one another's lives. Those with access to power continue to enjoy the benefits of a class system, while the vast majority of the proletariat is forced to live in circumstances that strip away their basic human rights. And that majority has little or no ability to improve their situation. The problem with communism is an ideology that can only be maintained through fear, intimidation, and indoctrination. There is no room for differing opinions. There is no room for dissent. There is no room for compromise. Stalin, Mao, Pol Pot, and other communist tyrants have visited unspeakable atrocities upon their own people, as have the fascist tyrants like Hitler and the Arrow Cross and others on the far right. In our case, my husband's case and my case, we experienced both the evils of communism and fascism in rapid succession. After the Nazis murdered most of Tom's family, as well as my own, we became subject to the devastation of communism. Its suffocating effect on our family's effort to rebuild after Hitler is described in the following excerpt from my memoirs, which my daughter will read to you now.
In view of the horrific examples we've heard today, this is a very mild example of how communism nevertheless insidiously undermines freedom and the very spirit of the people who have to live under its burden. Sorry. Sorry. These are excerpted from my mother's memoirs, which she has very wonderfully kept for us and her family in particular. And it covers a period between in Hungary after World War II, between 1945 and 1948. My mother had returned. She was able to escape Hungary through the efforts of Raoul Wallenberg, and she returned to see who remained of her family, and she found very few people. Hungary in the winter of 1945 was an amazing place, full of paradoxes. Budapest was in ruins. The once glittering boutiques were derelict, and the magnificent bridges spanning the Danube lay broken. There was a feeling of death and destruction and fear. But strangely, there was also a feeling of exuberance, a celebration which affirmed life in the midst of death, like a big feast after a funeral. There was loss, but also the exhilaration of being alive and having a second chance. The Russians did not rush to impose their straitjacket systems on the countries they occupied. Realizing the need for private initiative and enterprise to revive the economy, they allowed people to do what they could in the midst of their poverty and devastation. This was all the irrepressible people of Budapest needed. As soon as they had a modicum of freedom, they rushed to rebuild their shattered lives. My uncle Ernest, a dashing former officer in the Hungarian military, was delighted when I came home. Though I was only 14 and without experience, he put me in charge of my father's, her late father's at this point, once famous jewelry store. The store was, of course, ravaged, but its nameplate and great reputation were still in place. We cleared out 2 of the 12 show windows. We washed and scrubbed a small part of the relatively intact interior. We found cabinets and a gold scale with weights, which we could use to weigh the gold people would bring in to sell. And once we cleared the debris which blocked the front door, we declared ourselves open for business. Almost as soon as the sign went up, people started coming, looking for my father. But when they found out what had happened, they implicitly trusted me in his stead. Business was brisk and booming. Meanwhile, my uncle started mixing the delicious liqueurs my grandfather used to manufacture before the war. He was able to get the ingredients he needed from the countryside, and I began converting the money he made selling the liqueur into gold in our shop. And so we began our crude but exciting little capital formation. 3 years later, however, the communists were beginning to surface their real intention, which remains always the same, whether they take over Vietnam, Poland, or Hungary. After consolidation of power, clamp down on all freedoms and establish a ruthless tyranny, and an all-powerful establishment made up of a minority of revolutionaries, always in the name of the proletariat. Uncle Erne had been doing brisk business with his liquor store during the Christmas season of 1941. A businessman in Budapest was very upbeat. There was a feeling that finally normalcy was returning, and real prosperity was just around the corner. Then, on Christmas Eve, the business of the day was winding down, the gifts to the employees had been distributed, good wishes exchanged, and the money counted and put into neat stacks to be taken to the bank after the holiday. Just as he finished his business, the door suddenly opened and 2 men in suits, accompanied by an armed policeman, entered the store. They told Uncle Ernest, as they did to every other private business and factory owner in the country, to hand over the key to the store, all of the money, all of the documents, all of the books. They introduced him to the person who is now in charge of the enterprise and warned him to never again set foot on the property, at pain of instant arrest and deportation. There was very little resistance. The beleaguered businessmen of the country were used to hostile and criminal governments depriving them of life, liberty, and property. Law, order, justice, and freedom were always momentary and exceptional, usually occurring by happenstance in transitional periods, not something to be taken for granted as a right. Uncle Erne realized that the severe persecution of the unjustly deprived victims would follow. When he tried to return to his apartment just to pack up a few things, he found the door padlocked. His old nanny explained that the police had been there earlier and had told her to pack up her own belongings and move down to the stable, because the apartment in which she lived with Uncle Erne had been requisitioned for the proletariat. They didn't even allow her to get a clean shirt and socks for Erne, so he was now a homeless, penniless fugitive with only the shirt on his back to show for 3 years of hard labor. A small offense in the panoply and mosaic we've heard today, and nevertheless it gives us insight into the way that not only on a large scale, but on a deep and personal, intimate scale, communism devastates not only individuals, but the spirit of a nation.
We are fortunate in this country, as communism has so often demonstrated, obliterating political opposition only serves the powerful, leaving the national interest and the many people which that interest represents far behind. Power to those who choose to polarize society risks inciting the darkest elements of human nature. Governing from the middle is not easy. Often those at the extremes of the political spectrum are more passionate about political issues than those in the middle, who are more concerned about putting food on the table, keeping bills paid, and finding a way to get the kids through college. Leaders have a responsibility to that diverse and silent majority. My husband always said the world is like a book, and if you never travel, it is as if you have only read a single page. Similarly, if we only care about our own national interest, we are blind and dumb to the broader implication of our decision. With international trade, with Facebook, with the technological developments outpacing the legislative progress, every decision we make has an implication far beyond the obvious. From the food we choose to eat, the clothing to wear, to the activities we participate in, to the places where we work, to the people we marry and vote for, each of these decisions has broad-ranging social, economic, environmental, and cultural impact. Our country isn't perfect, but unlike victims of communism worldwide, we not only have the right but the duty to stand up in the name of justice, in the name of compassion, in the name of faith, and in the name of freedom. We have the right and the duty to care for our brothers and sisters who are less fortunate. We have the duty and right to defend the defenseless, to speak for the voiceless, to help the helpless. How seriously do you take that duty? How seriously do I take that duty? As we are remembering our brothers and sisters who are victims of communism, let us remember neighbors, be they Christians, Jews, atheists or Muslims, Syrians or Swedish. I ask you and I ask myself to commit to take full advantage of the freedoms we have to serve one another, to vote for wise men and women, to make responsible choices. Because in the end, that is what we are celebrating, what we are hoping for, and what so many are fighting for. The ability to live a life that affords opportunity to decide for ourselves. One of the victims of oppression in communism, Albert Einstein, observed, "A human being is a part of a whole called by us universe, a part limited in time and space. He experiences himself his thoughts and feeling as something separated from the rest, a kind of an optical delusion of consciousness. This delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and to affection for a few persons nearest us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature and its beauty. Thank you.
I'd now like to ask Ambassador Aldona Vash to come forward for the purposes of making a presentation. Ambassador Vash was the U.S. Ambassador to Estonia. She is a member of the board of the Victims of Communism Memorial and also, I believe, at the Institute of World Politics. A woman of many, many parts, a medical degree, who has come to this country and made a name for herself and for her family. And we're so very, very proud indeed to have her as a member of our board. Aldona Vash, Ambassador Vash.
The Truman Reagan Medal of Freedom is awarded to an individual who has distinguished themselves in opposing communism and tyranny. Secretary Donald Rumsfeld exemplifies this vision during his nearly 6 decades of serving our country. He has served as the 13th Secretary of Defense under President Ford, the youngest in U.S. history, and then, subsequently, 26 years later, became the 21st Secretary of Defense under President George W. Bush. When he was first named Defense Secretary, Mr. Rumsfeld advocated a policy of military modernization and peace through strength, which helped bring down the end of the Cold War. Subsequently, he made certain that the American military remained the first and the best defense of freedom, with an ability to oppose tyranny in all of its forms. He is one of the people, one of the individuals who's responsible for the renaissance of the United States military in the 21st century. Now, prior to this, after graduating from Princeton with a degree in political science, the former Navy pilot was elected and re-elected 4 times to serve in Congress. He also served in the White House as Chief of Staff, as an ambassador to NATO, and as a Chief Executive Officer to 2 Fortune 500 companies. Secretary Rumsfeld holds 11 honorary degrees and countless amounts of awards. On behalf of the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation, it is my honor to present Secretary Donald Rumsfeld with the Truman Reagan Medal of Freedom for his dedication to our nation, for his lifelong opposition to communism, and for his enormous commitment to freedom and democracy. Mr. Secretary.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. I appreciate those kind words. My friend Lee Edwards, Joe, members of Congress, Ed Foner here, who does so much in heritage, distinguished diplomats, ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen. Mrs. Lantos, it's always a pleasure to see you, to hear your words. Reggie Littlejohn, thank you also for your comments. It's an important message for all of us. Presidents Truman and Reagan are leaders that I admire greatly, and whose accomplishments are even more impressive with the passing of time. I've been around long enough to have lived through both their administrations. In fact, I was a good friend of Lee Edwards' father. I still think of Lee as a bright young man. We remember when President Truman and Winston Churchill denounced the Iron Curtain across Europe, and when President Reagan went to Berlin and famously said to Gorbachev, tear down that wall. They were, of course, men of different political parties, as Lee mentioned, different backgrounds to be sure, but they both understood the importance of vigilance against our nation's enemies, and that the defense of our nation was their very top priority as president. Reagan astounded his advisors when he was asked his approach to the Soviet Union and offered that deceivingly simple, concise statement: my strategy is we win, they lose. They were each clear-eyed about communism. They had the courage to denounce it, and they had the conviction that it could be defeated. So this award is well named, and I value it greatly. My thanks to all of you who support the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation. We now know the incredible toll that totalitarian ideology exacted on humanity. Indeed, communism was responsible for the death of more human beings than any other movement in the history of mankind. And we know it continues today. I hope that the work of this foundation and its memorial will remind future generations of communism's human cost. We must not forget that millions around the globe are still trapped in tyranny, still clinging to hope, and still looking to us. May the United States of America always be a beacon of light for the world, and may we be blessed with leaders who understand that and who value it. Thank you very much.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, we come to what I think is perhaps one of the most moving and important part of our ceremony, and that is the roll call, when we invite organizations and embassies to come forward and to place a wreath at the Victims of Communism Memorial. I'd like to begin by inviting the wreath of the Victims of Communism Memorial, if we could have that come forward.
Всегда почти, да. Это ничего, да? Вот. Я шучу.
The wreath of the National Captive Nations Committee. And now the roll call of nations, the Embassy of Albania. The Embassy of Bulgaria. The Embassy of the Czech Republic. The Embassy of Estonia. The Embassy of Hungary. The Embassy of Latvia. The Embassy of Lithuania. Embassy of Moldova. The Embassy of the Republic of Poland. The Embassy of Romania. The Taipei Economic and Cultural Representative Office, TECRO, or what we call the Republic of China. Embassy of Ukraine. Now the roll call of organizations. The Albanian American Freedom House. The American Federation of Government Employees, Local 1812 for the Voice of America. Lane Kirkland was one of the very first awardees of the Truman Reagan Medal of Freedom, so it's very appropriate. The Belarusian American Association. Friends of Wave. The International Campaign for Tibet. The International Committee for Crimea. The Naogai Research Foundation, led by Harry Wood, who is also a recipient of the Truman Reagan Medal of Freedom, as also Dr. Edwin Fullman, who is with us today. The new Cuban Cossack community. I like those hats. Take some extra pictures of those hats.
My name is Chen Zhan from Voice of America, China branch. We would like to thank you for all the good work you do to democracy, rights around the world, and we want to thank you for
the North Korea Freedom Coalition
and in support of VOA broadcast. Not just Chinese, but also Vietnamese, Cantonese, Tibetan, Lao, Burmese, all those languages.
Everybody likes the democracy. Raise our voice. Keep their life in service, which are so vital. So it's common language. That's always available.
And all the way from Hawaii, the VNTV Ohana from Hawaii.
Thank you. You spoke very beautifully for all the victims of communism throughout the world, throughout history. What would you like to say about human rights in China?
Human rights in China is one of the most important issues of our time. And we cannot stop raising our voice.
The Greek American Association.
So that is something that is one of the great problems and great injustices of the world. had to perform the pressure and we had to people try to do everything in our power to have mitigate this delicate level.
Thank you. We thank you. We wish happy your husband. We thank you. We wish you all the best.
Thank you very much. Thank you for all
And the Laos Coalition. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your time, but we are going to proceed from here to the Heritage Foundation for reception, refreshments, a little something to eat and drink, and we are going to show you for the first time the Gulag exhibit. The Gulag exhibit, a brand new virtual exhibit which will be on our or maybe we've read One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich, also by Solzhenitsyn. There's also a wonderful history of the Gulag by Anne Applebaum. These are three classic texts about the Gulag. This terrible thing called the Gulag. Well, what was the Gulag? And fortunately, that question can be answered for us now, visually and virtually, by Marcus Colvin. Marcus heads up his own company in Canada, but his grandfather was in the Gulag. He's from Estonian background. And he's also the webmaster, use the word master advisedly, of our website, the Global Museum on Communism.org. If you haven't visited, please do so. It's marvelous. So the latest exhibit, which we're going to put on the Global Museum on Communism, is the Gulag exhibit. It's extraordinary. You will see in Marcus's presentation, you will be able to visit a Gulag camp. You will see how that's done virtually. Marcus, please.
Thanks, Dr. Edwards. We'll begin by showing you a brief video that we showed back in November that sort of introduces the idea of the exhibit and the virtual camp. So if we can dim the lights a bit.
Life in the Gulag like. Imagine you're waking up in a small wooden barracks with 20 other prisoners. It's 6 in the morning. You've been sleeping on a wooden bunk on a thin mattress stuffed with straw. You've slept with your pants and your shirt, a padded overcoat, socks and mittens because it's 30 degrees below zero outside and the window panes of the barracks are covered with ice more than an inch thick. In a few minutes, a prisoner will bring in breakfast, 6 ounces of bread, about the size of your fist, and a small bowl of thin, lukewarm gruel.
They started in 1918, within a year of the revolution, when Trotsky was the first one to speak about them, and he wanted to incarcerate in them Czech prisoners of war. And Lenin began to talk about the need to have concentration camps in every town in Soviet Russia. And by the time he died, there were several hundred of them. And where people were incarcerated for indeterminate times, doing hard labor and not being properly fed. Then, of course, all this exploded on the sudden.
Stalin makes slavery an essential part of the communist economy. Here, digging the Volga-Don Canal are farmers, religious leaders, and inconvenient minorities. Stalin establishes his own secret police force, and slave labor camps are set up all over the Soviet Union. 125 camps, 10 million slaves. On the backs of his slaves, Stalin builds an industrial Russia geared for conflict with the West.
I was born in Moscow in 1934. My mother was English, my father Russian. My father was taken away in the purges, arrested in 1936. When I was born, it was already dangerous. Many people were being taken away to the Gulag. My mother tried for 2 weeks to get him out, to do something, to get in touch, to find out why he'd been arrested even. And then she began to fear terribly for me. So she got out to London, to England, with me as a child. That's why I'm alive and here.
My grandfather Edward, along with tens of thousands of other Estonians and Balts, was legally forced to mobilize with the Soviet Red Army in the summer of 1941. Dressed in only their summer clothes, they weren't sent to Red Army bases, they were instead sent to Gulag labor camps in the far north, where they were euphemistically called labor battalions. That winter, temperatures hovered around minus 30 degrees. Keep in mind that they were still in their summer outfits. They were tasked with felling trees in the camps, often without any tools whatsoever. If they didn't fill their daily work quotas or norms, they weren't fed. And that winter, a scene of frozen hell descended over the camps, where over 1/3 died of starvation, exhaustion, and cold over a period of about 12 short weeks. And that experience wasn't unique to a few thousand Estonians. The same was happening to millions of men, women, and children of dozens of ethnicities across the vast Gulag labor camps.
It's immensely important. The whole Soviet history should be taught. And I have not followed the textbooks, but my impression is that most don't know what really happened. They're not terribly interested in it, and nobody tells them that they should know about it. So it's sort of 70 years of horror is being wiped out, and I think it's a mistake.
This was going on, and for how long, for how many years? I mean, people are properly aware of the Holocaust and things like Dachau and Birkenau and Auschwitz, as they should be. But one American in maybe 1,000 or maybe 10,000 has ever heard of Kolyma or the other, Perm, or the other forced camps of the Gulag. So it was just a question of getting them to accept that such a prison system, but really was not a prison system so much as a forced labor camp archipelago, to get them to admit there was such a thing for that many years, and that they did not know about it. Very little, nothing in the media about it.
The Gulag exhibit at the Global Museum on Communism will feature some richly interactive micro exhibits within the Gulag exhibit itself, and some incredible original material about the Gulags, including essays by noted Gulag researchers and academics such as Anne Applebaum, Richard Pipes, Imbi Bayo, an Estonian historian who will be writing an essay about the experience of women in the Gulag. One of the real highlights of the exhibit will be the three-dimensional Gulag model. We're painstakingly researching specific architectural details and other items that you would have found in a camp. And the viewer, when they come to the exhibit, will be able to enter a three-dimensional world as if they were walking around a Gulag, and will hopefully give the viewer a real sense of what it would have been like to live in one of these dreadful, dreadful camps.
You keep working to stay warm, and you're always cold in Siberia. And when you're tired, you can barely lift your shovel or your feet. The guards finally let you stop. You file back to the barracks, where you're given another piece of bread and some thin soup with a fish bone if you're lucky. You fall exhausted on the wooden bunk and say to yourself, well, I'm still alive. One day gone. Another 3,254 days to go in the forced labor camp of Kolyma in the Gulag.
I introduce you to the Gulag exhibit and we do a short tour of what we have in the new exhibit, I'd like to begin by thanking Dr. Edwards and the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation for their years of dedication to this issue in history, and specifically forever ensuring that the victims of those monstrous regimes who did and continue to practice this twisted ideology are never, ever forgotten. And I thank you for affording me the privilege of allowing me to participate in the work you started so many years ago. This is a subject, as you can probably tell from the video, that's very close to my heart. In 1941, my grandfather Edward, along with 30,000 other of his countrymen, were forced to mobilize with the Red Army after Stalin had illegally annexed Estonia. But instead of joining the fight against the Nazis, Edward and his countrymen were forced into the Gulag meat grinder. Slave laborers to feed Stalin's long-term military ambitions. In the winter of 1941-42, over 1/3 died of starvation, disease, or the cold. With this, Stalin achieved two goals: the ethnically targeted elimination of a potential fifth column and much-needed slave laborers for his gulags. The founding aims of the Gulag were much the same: eliminate undesirable elements by creating a remote prison system where they could disappear to, and at the same time build an army of slave labor that would increase industrial output to fulfill unrealistic economic goals. We can be sure that the Soviet Gulag achieved one thing: human suffering on an unprecedented scale. Millions dead and hundreds of millions scarred and traumatized for a lifetime, the reverberations of which can be still felt in millions today around the world. What is unsettling is that this history is not well known in the West. Our children's textbooks skim past Stalin's repressions and the Gulag. And in Vladimir Putin's Russia, Stalin's legacy has received a complete makeover, where he's been remade into a great Russian hero. With this history, we're challenged by apathy and by a competing politically motivated and distorted agenda. And so 2 years ago, drawing on our experiences with the Global Museum on Communism, we endeavored to build an exhibit, an educational tool that would entice the English-speaking world and beyond to learn more about this dark history. And this is, if you haven't been there yet, this is the homepage of the Global Museum on Communism. Understanding that the ways by which most of us now consume information, specifically our youth, and that it's rapidly evolving into one where we rely largely on visuals and interactivity, we set a goal for the Gulag exhibit to create a visually engaging, entertaining, and informative site, and the most comprehensive English language online resource on this subject. Now quickly, before we take a look at the actual exhibit, I'd like to acknowledge the hard work of my business partner, Tarmo Sachs, who is watching and tracking what we're doing here today from our offices in Tallinn, and as well Rich DiGiovanni, who's come in from Philadelphia. He is the 3D artist who's created the virtual Gulag. So, let's then take a look at thegulag.org. I'll just briefly go through a few of the micro exhibits and features that we have, because I really want you to go in there and take a look for yourselves and then tell your friends about it. Among the exhibits, we have multimedia. We have interviews, video interviews with Richard Pipes, Ann Applebaum, John Utley, and we're going to be adding more as time goes by. One of the, we have essays from Dr. Pipes, an original essay about the Bolshevik origins of the Gulag, as well as Ann Applebaum, who has generously written an introduction to the exhibit for us. So now let's go into the exhibit section, assuming that the internet is working. It is. So let's, we had some problems this morning. So let's take a quick look at the Gulag timeline. This is a historical timeline of the Gulag, both political and historical. This is, I mean, it's quite innovative in that this can be viewed on your iPads and iPhones and your Androids. It doesn't matter where it is. So we have some major dates here and a very ominous sounding soundtrack. And viewers can browse through specific times. So 1920 here, We have the first Gulag camp is established in a former monastery at Solovetsky Island, which was a notorious camp and very cruel. And you can browse through by just dragging the timeline along. So there are a lot of visuals to go along with dates in the timelines and small image galleries for dates as well. And what we also have here is a map of the Gulag. When we built this, we assumed that it would take maybe 2 or 3 days to research all the material. It ended up taking about 3 solid weeks to go through the entire camp system geographically and put together the numbers. And when you do that, you understand how vast this system really was, stretching from, in the west, from Estonia all the way out to the Far East. Users can go through this map and roll over specific areas, and they'll get statistics and information on camps in the various oblasts and then specific camp administrative centers. We also have an exhibit, a micro exhibit about the art of the Gulag, and this is specifically the Getman exhibit. This is an incredible historical document. Nikolai Getman, if you haven't heard his name before, was a Ukrainian artist who was put into the Gulag after criticizing Stalin or making a joke about Stalin during a card game. And there was an informer amongst the bunch. I guess he lost and wasn't too happy and informed on Mr. Getman. And Mr. Getman received, I believe it was 15 years, Dr. Edwards? It was 10 years. And after he was released, he secretly painted some of his memories of the Gulag. And there are 50 images in this entire collection. And so viewers can go through, look through the entire collection, and there's information over on the right-hand side that speaks directly to the painting. Now, of course, what everybody is waiting to see is the virtual Gulag. Now, there are 2 ways of looking at or viewing the virtual Gulag. One is that you can launch the tour online through the player that we have within the site. Viewers can also scroll down here and download a Windows or Mac version of the site. That means that you can go to the site, download the file, and you can take it with you on your laptop wherever you go, whether you have a PC or a Mac. So for teachers, for example, they can take it into the classroom, and if they are, hopefully, speaking about and teaching about this history, students can actually come in and walk through the Gulag. So it's a fairly large file. It takes a little bit of time to download, but it should be in here shortly. The camp itself, the research that we did, I mean, camps varied in size, they varied in materials as far as the perimeters were concerned, so we just sort of took a median of what seemed to be most common. And so here on the first page, we have directions on how to use the Gulag. You need to use your arrows and your mouse. And now we will enter the Gulag. So there are information posts spread about the entire camp. This is an introductory one. We've called this camp Log Punkt 41 in the Kolyma area, which would have been part of the Dalstroy camp system. It's of course fictional, but we've taken all of our facts from, mainly from Anne Applebaum's research and other, and certainly Memorial in Russia. Now users, using their arrows, can walk around. They can use their mouse to look around and provide direction for where they're walking. Now, I'm not going to take you through the entire camp. These workers are going out to the forest to fell trees. And so we have a series of barracks that are, again, based on photo research that we've done, I mean, there aren't blueprints really for these camps that existed. They were, many of them, especially the ones in the far north, were just thrown up ad hoc. As they were building a highway, a railroad, they would just quickly throw them together with the slave labor that they had, and that would be it. And so each of these barracks have some information inside them. In fact, in this one, we can see there's a prisoner who's still sleeping, clothing that was set up to dry, which was often done, and apparently from all the memoirs that I've read, the odor that came from the drying clothing was just incredible and made living in barracks very uncomfortable. Now we'll quickly proceed over to the mess hall, where you'll see that prisoners are waiting for their soup and for their single piece of bread. And there's sound bites that appear in certain zones. So guards will say certain things, prisoners will say certain things, so that the viewer has a real sense that they're within the law. And this is what a mess hall would have looked like. And then we'll quickly finally go over to the Gulag office. There's an isolation chamber, for example, as well, and a mass grave. He's telling us to get to work.
Товарищи офицеры, получен приказ из Главного управления в Магадане о том, что мы должны увеличить нашу выработку на шахтах.
So I encourage you to go to thegulag.org, click on this, and do take a look. It is absolutely incredible, the actual environment. And I was mentioning to Dr. Edwards yesterday that I have a 7-year-old and a 9-year-old. And a couple of days ago, I just thought, give it a try. I mean, it's targeted towards a much wider audience, but let's see how those kids are, if they'll be interested in it. They ended up playing with this for about an hour. And they had all sorts of questions when they were done. So I'm sure that it will be an effective tool in teaching this history going forward. So thank you very much, and hopefully you'll give us your feedback through the foundation.
Did anyone recognize that voice about halfway through? That was Ronald Reagan.
Yep, sure was.
Ronald Reagan did a series of films about communism in the 1950s for a college out in Arkansas. And we were able, Marcus was able to track that down and to use that. So you could tell that's a very distinctive, younger Reagan voice. What I'd like to do, if I may, and this is going to take us literally a couple of minutes. I talked earlier about the curriculum on communism. And I'm not great on PowerPoint presentations, but this is, I want to go back to that first one. If you can go back up. This is the cover which we've created, working with Claire Griffin, professional educator for 30 years. This is the 10-lesson plan for high school students, 10th graders who don't know a great deal about communism because their teachers don't know a great deal about communism. And we have sent out, we've taken the 10 chapters, we're sending it out, vetting it with various teachers around the country. I know what you're going to say or think, because I thought the same thing, and say, oh, teachers, they're going to dismiss this or be very hostile. They're not. They're saying, oh, the feedback from these teachers so far has been positive. And so we're taking their suggestions, a little more of this, a little less of that, some more interactive stuff and so forth. And so far, the positive feedback really encourages us that we have the right kind of curriculum on communism for high school students. Then the project goal, to learn about it. We are going to be using the virtual museum, the virtual Gulag, all the elements of the Global Museum on Communism.org as a factor for the curriculum. The audience, high school sophomores, they're taking what's required, which is a world history course. So our curriculum is a supplement to what they already have there. And again, if the teachers are saying, oh yeah, this is going to be useful, this is going to be helpful. Lesson content, things like Marx and his legacy, Lenin and the Bolshevik Revolution, Stalin in Russia, Mao in China. The 10 lessons in which we cover all the major elements of communism. And then the next one, Kim Il-sung, North Korea. Susan, you're here somewhere, you'll be pleased with that.
Yeah.
Germany, Berlin Wall, American Vietnam, Castro in Cuba. Mike Gonzalez is still here, he'll be happy about that. And Captive Nation, those are the 10 lessons which we tried to cover. And so far, these are some of the comments from various teachers already. I found the lesson in Germany interesting, particularly appropriate. I see loads of opportunities from New York. Background essay was informative from Kansas. I enjoyed it. A sophomore who actually saw it from Florida. This lesson, China could be used in advanced placement, comparative government. So this is what we're trying to do with the curriculum. We need your help, we need your support, and you'll be hearing from us. And if you have any questions, particularly for Marcus, on what he's done this brilliant job with the virtual gulag or anything else, we'd be happy to answer them, Marcus. Any questions from anyone or comments? Please, Joe.
This is very important, and I'm kind of upset that we didn't get started earlier with the history of communism in Albania, one of the most incredible, brutal systems. And it's been our fault because we've been so much tied up on other things, Kosovo and whatnot. We didn't see this. And we can see your great organization emerging, and now it's here for the 5th year. And I'm delighted to be here. So I will, with my wife, Shirley Cloyes-Giovanni, and hopefully with the help of Ambassador Galanji, we will make up for lost time and try to put together for you this history. There's a lot that is in writing, and there's a gulag itself, just in Albania. Like 2 people came today who were in the worst prison full spot. So I just want you to know that we will make this a project of our foundation. I've got people from the Albanian American Civic League here. It may cost us some money, but we got to do this. Information is power, and people do not know the suffering of the Albanian people.
Thank you very much, Joe. Michael.
Yes, before you leave today, if you want a copy of this book, I'll be happy to give it.
I would suggest that, with all due respect, that it must be our organization that produces, edits, evaluates, and makes the presentation for any and all national groups. We cannot, with all due respect, Giovanni, we cannot really accept a production.
I understand.
Okay.
We won't produce it. We provide the raw material for you to know. This is not easily available.
No, you have that material in the organs of Albanian Secret Service in Albania. You have all the executions of Albanian Catholic clergy, the rape and the murder of the nuns. So if it's going to be a gulag about Albania, it has to be by outside forces that they have the power to search what happened in Albania.
What I called for today.
And also, excuse me, Mr. Zupan, also that the leaders of Albania and the new leaders of Albania who took part are exposed for what they are. So must not forget that, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes.
I have, I guess it's been a constant preoccupation of mine, I guess, in history. One thing which I've been working on is the biography of Major General Nicholas Nazarento, who was a big feature of this organization. He did a lot of work in Washington. I'm trying to collect his correspondences and letters, his work with the National Security Council, and a lot of his efforts are sort of forgotten now. They've sort of been pushed aside. Most people don't know what he did, but he was a fellow that constantly worked to bring this in the forefront of the press and the American government, and I'm sure you must have been there, but in 1984 he was invited to the Rose Garden with President Reagan, and that was I guess the peak of all of this work that we had done with the anti-communism, and then after Reagan's second term, things started fizzling away. So that's one issue which I'd like to sort of, I'm gathering the materials, but I'd like you to have people through your organization to know what this fellow did, because he did a tremendous amount of work. Now, what you mentioned here with your communism, and actually this goes back when I was a child, but my mother had given me the book by J. Edgar Hoover called Masters of Deceit. And right now, that book is very hard to find, if not impossible to find. But you can imagine a kid who was reading this, and somehow I managed, whatever was there, I took it to heart. And he exposed it for what it was. And it has just as much relevance then. I picked up the book. It has relevance now to simplify things and to know what the purpose, because it hasn't really died. Communism, it's still out there. It might have changed its name, but the methods are still there.
Thank you.
And another book which he has written too is called, by J. Edgar Hoover, called The Studies of Communism. And this guy was amazing because he knew exactly who they were and how they operated, and he gave us the blueprints. And with all these other people that were spinning their propaganda, it got shunted aside as kind of Cold War, garbage or propaganda. But they haven't changed at all. They're very active to this day. And my interest is that I have to go back to that to kind of reframe it and to get it out there again in a more, like a less political way, but to have the information as concise so you can hit people faster. And that's, but we have it here. Like I said, J. Edgar Hoover did the work. It's we just have to simplify it and represent it. And like a forum like this is fascinating because there are people, especially the younger kids, they need this interactive approach.
That's exactly what we're going to be doing.
If they don't have it, they kind of lose interest fast.
Thank you very much. Yes, please.
Colonel Milton Davis. I just want to mention there's a fellow in Frederick called Len Wachowski, Dr. Len Wachowski. I'm sure you both know him, or if you don't, I can get you in contact with him. But he's done a lot of publication already on this topic, and that information might be really useful. It has a Laffian overtone, but it's extremely valuable. He's done a lot of on-the-ground research, and he's done a lot of publications. If you don't have his contacts, call and I can get it for you.
Yes, please. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, I think one of the things that we do want to do with the Gulag is collect more information. So if anyone does have more information, essays, research, that sort of thing, please send it along because we'd like to post it on the exhibit.
Can you tell us more about the museum you talked about?
The bricks and mortar. Yeah. What we would like to do is to take the virtual museum, which is the Global Museum on Communism, the online one. And the elements of that would really serve as the model for the bricks and mortar. For example, there would be national exhibits, as there are with the Global Museum on Communism, with the online museum. There are national exhibits about Russia under communism, China under communism, Poland under communism, Hungary, and all the various national, Hungary under communism, and so forth. Paul Hollander wrote the article about Hungary under communism for us, an expert. Know about him on that. There would also be temporary exhibits dealing with other subjects, things like the Laogai, which is the Chinese version of the Gulag. Right now, there are, if Harry Wu were here, he could talk about it at some length about what the size of the Laogai. In fact, in China, there are several million Chinese people who are there, many of them political prisoners. So it would be an exhibit about that. It would be interactive. There would be an auditorium. an opportunity like this for people to come in to see films. There would be a research component of the museum as well, so that people could come and study about various aspects. Talking earlier today, we used the figure 100 million victims. We don't really know. We don't know, because a lot of the files and records are not yet made available to us. So serious research needs to be done by serious scholars. One of the ideas that we would use, for example, we would have a version of the Goddess of Democracy as you came into the museum in the opening foyer, and there she would be, reminding people of Tiananmen Square. There would also be the idea in the foyer would be a timeline of communism all along the cupola of the opening big thing, and you'd be able to see, using multimedia, all various aspects of communism, starting with the Bolshevik Revolution right up to the present. So a lot of what we want to do with the Bricks and Mortar Museum is already there. It's already something that we've experimented with and feel very comfortable with, which is there with our online museum. Is that helpful? Yes. Please, Annette.
This is a somewhat related question. I am curious as to how you are distributing this, both to schools and to homeschooling groups and associations throughout the country.
Right.
You know, as someone who's been quite deeply involved in education from a number of perspectives, I realize that though, of course, we treat communism in any educational, historical situation, it's a very cold treatment of that subject.
Mm-hmm.
It lacks the vibrancy and the light and the power of what Victims of Communism is doing, and what, of course, the website and this opportunity to sort of experience the Gulag can do for our young people. And you know, the need for this, not only to give them perspective on the world, but perspective on their own lives,
Right.
is huge. And so I'm wondering what mechanisms you're using
Well,
to get it
we're
out there.
beginning to work on that marketing plan. We've been concentrating so far on just doing the 10-lesson plan.
Sure.
And getting this feedback from teachers, getting leads for schools, for school districts. We've also been talking to even at some state boards, for example, Virginia. We think that would be a very, very rich possibility for us in terms of using this lesson plan at the state level. So, you going to help us with that?
I'd love to help you with that. I think that it's very important,
Good.
very important.
Fine. So we definitely will be in touch.
It's
with you
important for
about
our
that.
country,
Right.
you know, as
Aldona. Oh yes, please.
I just finished sophomore year in high school, and I would probably have taken this supplement if it was available last year. I took Global History 2, which deals with all of this, and we studied communism for about a month. And I just think this will be very helpful. This is exactly what the course needs. We were mainly, well, at least in my course, we were lacking enough evidence, enough solid evidence. Like, we were going over the big picture, but we didn't really have the resources of the solid evidence, and I think this will be great. So just great job, and I think a lot of students will be very thankful.
Wonderful. Can we quote you?
Yes.
That's a wonderful, wonderful endorsement. Thank you. Yes.
My name is Gilbert. I'm the Albanian ambassador, and I'm really proud to have so many Albanians here. And I don't want to make this an Albanian session, but I have lived in both systems, communism and democracy. And I believe that the risk of having communism repeated throughout the world is much higher than having Nazism being repeated. Because for the Holocaust against the Jewish people, it is so much being done through education of younger generations or every kind of state of the population, so that everybody knows the threat, everybody is aware of what Nazism did to the Jewish people and to the world. But compared to what the communists did to the world, so this is a huge difference. There is a huge gap in educating people. So this is a very good initiative, and of course the Embassy of Albania will be very glad to share with you whatever information we have. In Albania we have a special institute for politically persecuted people. There is a pavilion in the National Historical Museum. but there is so much data, and I think the best sources are the living survivors of the, let's say, the communism in Albania. So this is crucial. This is very important because the message should be that we don't want to have it being repeated. Otherwise, it remains in books. But it's something different to have lived through it and to have experienced, for example, the Scotch prison. I have been visiting the prison where Mandela was kept in South Africa. And compared to what our prisoners experience in Albania, especially the political prisoners, the prison of Mandela looked like a 5-star hotel. So there are so many untold stories that the vast majority of people do not know and do not understand, because it's beyond human imagination what communism did to us. So I promise I will be as helpful as I can to the organization, and thank you very much for inviting us.
I've been in American Freedom House. Dr. Edwards, we heard that the Prime Minister of Hungary is committing himself to give some money. Is U.S. government interested to build a museum and expose communism?
Oh yes, I don't think there'd be any opposition, any problem about that. No. But the thing is that we have had a rule, as a matter of fact, with the memorial, that was all built with private funds. As a matter of fact, the law is that for the construction of a memorial or a museum or a memorial or a monument, no federal funds. It has to be all private funds, so we did it all privately. Now, that memorial was a major undertaking, but comparatively modest when you think about it in terms of the dollars involved. This museum that we're talking about, a bricks and mortar, is much more serious. We're talking about somewhere between $45 and $55 million, and that's more than we have in the bank right now. So one of the things which we'll have to look at, have to talk with our board about, is whether or not we want to seek some kind of funding or supporting from the U.S. government. But what we're so grateful for is that after a lot of people saying, this is a terrific idea, go to it, do it, and so forth, that finally Hungary has stepped forward in the person of Viktor Orban and said, okay, we'll write you a check. And so that really is going to make a difference, giving us the C grant, enabling us to take that important step about really seriously organizing for a bricks and mortar museum. And I know, Annette, that you've had wonderful experience with getting support like that, and what you've done with the Lantos Foundation. Yes, please, Susan.
I just wanted to compliment you. What you've done is outstanding. And Dr. Edwards, your leadership of this foundation has been tremendous, and I've been honored to be able to work with you on this over the years. As somebody who's been an advocate for the people of North Korea, I just wanted to make one recommendation to follow up on what Annette said, is in making this very relevant for today, because people don't realize that there's still 5 countries that are suffering under communism, and there is a gulag system in North Korea where several 100,000 are incarcerated. And at the risk of all of us comparing different countries, there's some, which one's worse? Because I would say that looks like a luxury hotel compared to what's going on in North Korea today. But anyway, I hope that you will, once the gulag, the Soviet gulag's done, that the Lao guy will be next, and that the North Korean political person, because those are 2 camps that are, systems that are still in.
Yes, I know that.
And we'd be glad to help on that. We've got artists that have survived the camps too.
And by the way, if you have not visited there, Harry Wu, who was the executive director of the Laogai Research Foundation, and who was himself in the Laogai in China for 19 years. For 19 years. By the way, you may know that the reason why he was there was that he criticized the Soviet invasion of Hungary. And that's the reason why he wound up for 19 years in a Laogai, because he just stood up in class one day and criticized the Soviet invasion of Hungary. And so he has, there's now a museum not too far from, about a block and a half from DuPont Circle on the Laogai. So I encourage you to go visit that if you haven't already done so. Yes, I don't want to take up too much more time, but yes, please, people who haven't talked yet, yes.
Yeah, my name is Belum Damai. I spent
12 years in the prison. Much good luck in Albania. I spent, first of all, I appreciate you and I thank you for the job you're doing. I spent 20 years from the collapse of Berlin Wall. And Albanian government, I call it neo-communist government, not even one person visited the Gulag in Albania. They are doing nothing to tell the new generation for that genocide. So I did a documentary by myself. It's original from the Gulag Spatch. He is another friend of mine. He spent 8 years in prison too. So the reason I'm asking you is you have to tell powerful people in Washington, because we see the Washington like symbol of the liberty, and actually is. So those governments, they don't have a clue about our suffering. New generation, they doesn't know nothing about what's happened. And the problem is people in the government, they are proud for what they did to us 3-4 generations. And he's sorry for my language, but he's a shame. That dictator wife, Hoja in Albania, she's so proud. And she give interview publicly in TV for what her husband did. He was worse than Stalin. I don't want to keep people too much talking about it, but one more time I appreciate Mr. Roosevelt, everybody else here, and I hope this organization can tell the true story what's happened to us and to other under genocide comments. Thank you very much.
Quick question for Marcus. Can you give an example of one of the interactive exhibits? For instance, when I was a sophomore in high school, I remember writing exams. The question was, imagine you are conducting the French National Assembly at the trial of Louis XVI. What are the issues? How do you vote? So on and so forth. What, in some sense, that was interactive.
Sure.
You are there, and you were there. What is the interactive component?
Well, the interactive component within the Gulag exhibit itself is that you put yourself in the shoes of someone who is being summarily just sort of convicted, picked up, and thrown on a train, and you arrive at the Gulag. So we sort of, through the exhibits, we describe that entire process. There's transport. Anne Applebaum does a wonderful job. There's a 3 or 4 minute video clip where she describes that process. John Utley also describes some of that. And so when you arrive at the virtual Gulag, you've already gone through all of this, you arrive there. And certainly, I mean, it's not interactive in the sense that you have to go and now go out in the forest and cut down 5 trees in order to get your puddle of soup and a grain of bread. But you're seeing these prisoners in the camp, and you're learning about them as if you were basically a fly on the wall.